Our special guest tonight is Josh Weston, chairman of ADP. In my mind, Mr. New Jersey Business. Josh, welcome to the show.
It's nice to be here.
Before we begin, I'd like to discuss some past events. We're going to discuss the current and future events later on in the program. Give me some of your background, if you will.
Well, if you want to start at the beginning, I was born in a cold water flat in Brooklyn, probably a half a mile from Ebbets Field, if you know what that used to be.
Oh, yes, Flatbush Avenue.
Yeah,
okay.
Close by. And then I went to school in Brooklyn, went to a high school called Brooklyn Tech. It was a subway school. All of us got there by subway. And I got so well trained on the subway that when the time came to go to college, I went to City College by subway and graduated City College and then ended up in New Zealand, of all places. But if you want to know about it, you have to ask me.
New Zealand, post-World War II. How did you get there?
Well, at that time, there was a kind of grant started by Senator Fulbright called the Fulbright Grant. And the government was issuing grants in various countries. And I figured out with a little bit of help that I had the best chance if I applied for New Zealand because not many people knew where it was. So I applied for a master's degree course in New Zealand, courtesy of the U.S. government and New Zealand, and ended up going down there for 9 months, got my master's degree, and came back via Europe. And it took me 3 months to come home. It was delightful.
Around the world.
Around the world.
That's kind of interesting. Where did you work in service?
Well, when I came back, I went into the Navy. I was called up during the Korean War and ended up being stationed at an airfield in Brooklyn called Floyd Bennett Airfield. And as may seem ironic a little later in this conversation, I was assigned to paying the sailors at the airfield.
You were in charge of the payroll?
No, the boss was in charge of the payroll, but I did
all the work.
You were doing the pay. I did the work, yeah.
How did your career start?
Well, somewhere in there, I forget exactly how, I answered an ad which turned out to be a mail order company now called J. Crew. Back then it had a different name, and I got into the mail order business, liked it because it involved lots of people, lots of information, and somewhere along the line it even involved computers, which I liked. And I stayed there about 18 years, became Mr. Number 2 in what was then called J. Crew, and after 18 years thought I ought to make some new friends in a new place.
You're married? Fit children?
I'm married, have 4 kids, 6 grandchildren, and I don't know if they're still counting or not.
And you live in?
I live in Montclair.
Right here in New Jersey?
Yeah, I could practically walk to this building.
Okay. Your career at ADP, when did that start?
1970.
And how did it start?
Well, my predecessor at ADP is a guy called Frank Lautenberg, now U.S. Senator.
I think I know him, yes.
Yeah. In any event, back then Frank was the operating head of ADP. He also lived in Montclair. And so we both met each other here, there, and everywhere in one way or another. As his company was starting to grow rapidly, he figured he needed some help. Now, I was heading an operation that was $100 million big, and back then ADP was $30 million. So he thought I was a big guy with lots of big company experience, and he wanted it. And I wanted a change.
Where do they stand today in comparison, size-wise?
Well, okay, let's start with ADP.
Crew is very big, I understand.
Yeah, Crew's about $700 million big in sales. ADP is about $4 billion with a B.
That's quite a turnaround.
That's a big number.
Yeah.
It came a long way.
Wait, I also want to mention to the folks out there that you're still affiliated with Crew, though.
Yeah, I'm on the board of J. Crew, and I attend their meetings, and I'm not much of a fashion judge, though. They've done a good job.
Okay. With ADP, just a brief summary of what you did at ADP and how you started.
Well, when I started at ADP back in 1970, my first mission...
The job description, perhaps we should...
Well, I'll put it differently. My first mission was don't disturb the people who were there already with some big cheese newcomer coming in. So I told Frank Lautenberg, hey, the best thing we ought to do is call me Administrative Vice President. Nobody will know what it means, including me. Don't tell anybody they're working for me, and just let me rattle around for 3 months, and then nature will take its course. And nature took its course. And gradually I became more and more the head of operations, and Frank was the CEO by then, and then later on when Frank got elected to the Senate, I became the CEO.
What actually happened then is your job developed.
The company grew, the job developed, I developed. Frank spent more time on the things he liked, which was best at, which was heavily into the marketing in the external world. And as ADP was growing from several hundred employees to many, many thousands, the operating environment was right up my alley. So we tended to stick to our respective strengths.
management succession, by the way. That's very important, I guess, at ADP.
It's important anywhere, but sometimes it doesn't work out.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
That was what I was trying to drive at. There's a number of large corporations now that's having problems filling management roles, I see.
It is very, very hard for several reasons. If you place all your bets on one person, and then either the person doesn't seem to be working out as a good number two, or the person gets wooed away by another company as number one, you're reset to zero. So it is very difficult. Large companies like GE can do something smaller companies can't do. They can put in place a fair number of competent number twos and then essentially have comparative competition. Whatever it was didn't happen at ATT.
Let's get back now. Give me some of your community and civic affairs right now.
Well, right now the list is...
By the way, we only have a half hour.
Okay, well, I won't tell you all about it. I was chairman and CEO up until last August, at which point I became chairman and the president became the CEO. So I'm now a happy part-timer at ADP, and it's about time. I was full-time and then some for 26 years. And what I'm doing now is taking all the time I gained by going part-time at ADP and putting it very heavily in the pro bono field. So I'm involved in lots of pro bono activities, ranging from international to national to state to local. And if I start rattling them all off, we may get lost. Well, you can pick a few if you want.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we pick subjects rather than specific instances?
Okay.
And then you can tell what your input is on it. For example, education.
Well, education, in my opinion, is the most important single subject in our society because although you want to get rid of drugs, you want to get rid of crime, you want to improve infrastructure, you want to cut the lines in the Holland Tunnel, you can make a list a mile long. But when you get to education, you're talking about the whole next generation of citizens. And if you don't get education straight, then the citizens who succeed us aren't going to optimize the quality of life. So if you had to pick any one thing, without taking away from all the other valuable things, I pick education, and I had a monumental exposure to that when the then Governor Florio appointed me to the state's Quality Education Commission. That was an eye-opener.
Well, we're going to hold it there for a moment, and we'll be right back.
Sometimes it's not safe to be old.
My son hit me.
They were always threatening to put me in a nursing home.
She was always taking my money.
They didn't take good care of me.
I didn't know I could get help.
I'm so glad I called. I was really afraid to call.
They got my daughter help, too.
If you or anyone you know is being abused, neglected, or exploited, call to get help.
Here is Surgeon General C. Everett Koop with a message about self-help groups, one of the nation's fastest-growing methods of coping with personal, emotional, and health problems.
Millions of Americans are finding the help they need in self-help groups, where people with similar problems talk with others who really understand. No matter what your concern, drug abuse, family problems, or a chronic health condition, there's a self-help group for you.
In New Jersey, call 1-800-4MASH.
When the heavens thunder, when the nation calls, come on, you can make a difference and be a part of it all.
Find yourself in the Army National Guard, serving 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, and you'll find an extra paycheck, money for college, and a great way to serve your community. Call 1-800-GO-GUARD.
In the Army National Guard, you can.
We want to see our children succeed. But setting easy goals for our kids creates the toughest obstacle they'll ever face. Because succeeding in the real world isn't easy. Help the effort to raise standards in America's public schools. Call 1-800-96-PROMISE.
We're back with Josh Weston. Josh, let's get back to the Quality Education Commission you headed for Governor Florio, then Governor Florio. Give us some background on it and what did it accomplish?
Well, I don't know that with hindsight we accomplished very much because the report wasn't adopted, but we accomplished a lot in that several of us, including myself, learned one heck of a lot about education in New Jersey. I'll call that the macro picture. I also got it at the micro level because just at about the same time, I adopted a class of 36th graders in Paterson, New Jersey. And there I saw the education delivery system, or the absence thereof, at the local level. And whether you take the macro picture or the micro picture, we can and should do so much more for students in K through 12 than we do. It's a sinful shortcoming.
Effectively, that's where the change in this country is going to take place, I would guess, in K through 12.
Well, it's the best investment you can make, because when you invest in children, the return on that investment's got about 50, 60, 70 years in front of them. And although there are other things you can invest in, I think that's number one.
Well, let's get back to you. This personal transition we spoke about earlier, is education going to be one of the things you'll be devoting more time to?
Well, I am devoting time to it already, and it comes in many different flavors and shapes. For example, I tend to visit and financially support a lot of experimental schools. There are two in Newark, Chad School, Link School. I'm involved in being of advice to various school systems. I'm on advisory boards and regular boards of quite a few colleges and universities. But the most important thing, I think, starts with the state legislature, because unless we change some of the structural things, we will not get the education we're capable of getting in New Jersey. And the issue has got very little to do with money.
Well, but this issue is not a New Jersey issue per se. This is really a national issue. I know you're
well, except when you get to K through 12, the federal government doesn't run K through 12.
Yeah, it's local. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, but I mean, it's an awareness should be on a local, general, national level. That's
the
what
principles apply in all 50 states.
Okay.
And we're amongst the many that don't apply the principles right.
Okay. Now, what is your expanded involvement, perhaps, in the governmental affairs?
Well, I just finished a one-year assignment as a member of something called the National Commission to Restructure IRS.
By the way, before you go any further, that's how you're on this program. I saw you at the hearings.
No, I hope you agree with what I said.
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Go ahead.
In any event, Congress created that commission, 17 people, I was one of them, in order to recommend to Congress and the White House how to make IRS work better. Had nothing to do with tax policy, just how to make them more polite, more efficient, and turn them into an operating organization. We delivered a report, which I don't think time permits us to get into now, but I think it was a very worthwhile year, and I think it will serve a useful purpose in straightening out IRS.
How much did Phil Howard influence that report?
I know Phil Howard quite well, but from a different activity.
Go ahead.
I'm the research chairman of the Committee for Economic Development. That's about 200 CEOs who are trying to give back to society by taking important issues and issuing recommendations to Congress and the executive branch. One of the things we're working on is trying to get sanity in government regulations. That may sound like an oxymoron. Phil Howard is on the subcommittee at the CED, Committee for Economic Development, that's going to come out with a position paper on how the heck do you introduce sanity into the regulatory process.
Let's go back a moment. I honestly didn't know he was on the subcommittee, but I know what Phil Howard, his book.
The Death of Common Sense.
Right, his book, The Death of Common Sense. And I know that's a favorite of yours. That's why I brought it up. And perhaps we should discuss a little bit about the death of common sense in the government. And I would try and tie it into the restructuring of the IRS. Maybe that does
I'll take it one step further. I'll tie it into the private sector to boot.
Absolutely.
Because essentially what often happens, particularly with large organizations, process becomes the objective instead of the result. You see that in education, be it the union or the boards of education. They're all hung up in process, and they all forget what the outcome is, the student.
New York City has more administrators per student than they have teachers, as I recall.
New Jersey ain't so great either.
Exactly.
But whether you look at a school system, or you look at a healthcare system, or you look at the IRS, or you look at the Pentagon, where I'm also involved in another study commission, or if you look at large companies that have lost their way, in every single case, you will find that the process has become everybody's agenda, not the outcomes, and they tend to keep doing what they did yesterday because habit is comfortable, as compared to saying, what are we all about? What are we trying to accomplish? What's a better way to do it? than the way we did it yesterday. And that principle applies to K through 12, applies to universities, applies to IRS, applies to companies.
Do they lose sight of the end user of whatever they're developing or whatever they're selling or whatever they're providing?
Well, there are many, many organizations, private and public sector, that forget that they're in existence primarily for the end user and beneficiary.
Right.
Over and beyond that, a lot of people just like the comfort of not having to stir the pot. If you don't stir your pot, the competitive world will stir your pot, and they won't stir it when you want to stir it. So it's better to stir your own pot.
Well, it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of, along the same lines, there's a lot of talk recently about upgrading our libraries. Again, it's an educational thing.
Yeah.
But I noticed that in local town libraries, while they are kind of busy, although Montclair happens to be in the forefront, it's quite progressive. Some of the other ones are very parochial, if you will.
Yeah.
And but Barnes and Noble, you go up there or up to the I'm trying to think of the other one up in the mall. They're jumping.
Yeah.
And the people have to pay for the books there. That concerns me.
Right.
In our local library, you don't have to pay for it, but yet they're not doing the business.
I'll give you a bit
will.
of a bottom line to that. Barnes & Noble has a bottom line.
Oh,
and
yes.
they can tell, and the public can tell very visibly when they're not doing well.
What's going and what's not going.
There is no bottom line in either the service of a government or in the service of a library. No one is on the spot when, through negligence or laziness, they leave yesterday alone in the public sector.
And they're not moving forward to what the needs are today.
Yeah, then on top of that, there's very little accountability. And even if you have accountability, particularly if positions are covered by job-protected civil service or tenure, accountability is a meaningless word because no one uses the accountability to say, hey, either do a great job or ask me to help you do a great job or move aside and we'll get somebody else to do a great job. Very hard to do that in government. Just to flash back to education for a minute, when I was on that Quality Education Commission, there were about 80,000 teachers all over New Jersey. In a typical year, only 10 of them were terminated by overcoming tenure. Now, you can't have only 10 misfits in 80,000 teachers. But people, by law or by habit, take the line of least resistance. Now, I'm not for firing people, but I think unless you have a bottom line, you either create a bottom line or the world creates a bottom line, many people tend to coast.
We have to draw a line and adhere to it. That's what you're saying. We'll be right back.
Kids. For 1 hour a week, you leave your concrete world of flip phones and faxes and talk to 20 kids about how business works. They will question everything, but those 20 kids will talk to 20 more. So by Saturday, what you said on Thursday could be halfway around their world. You get to make a difference. Could just make the rest of your week pretty dull. That's the new JA, teaching kids how business works.
It's a thin line between newborn and stillborn, full term and premature, between healthy and sick. If you're pregnant or think you are, getting prenatal care early is the most important step you can take. Don't put your baby's health on the line. Take care of yourself so you can take care of your baby. Find out now about getting prenatal care. Call 1-800-311-2229.
Welcome back. We're here with Josh Weston, and some of our subject is personal transition from a business executive into the real world, if you will. Josh, we've already covered education, the IRS. There's an interesting subject I saw in your bio, business executives for national security. BENS, I guess it's called for short. What is that all about?
Let me tell you. Benz consists of several hundred senior execs like myself. Our mission in life is to take the relevant private sector experience we have and apply it where relevant in the Pentagon. And we have very good access to the Pentagon. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs listens to us. The Secretary of Defense supports us, as do the heads of the various services. But the interesting theme coming up now is something I'd like to spend a minute or two on. Benz has created something called the Tail to Tooth Commission. You would never have heard of it. TAIL stands for that portion of the whole Pentagon budget that's overhead, and tooth stands for the cutting edge that knows how to fight. If you take the whole Pentagon budget today, 70% of it is spent on tail, 30% is spent on tooth. In yesteryear, it used to be about 50-50. If we could just reduce the tail and take the saved money and turn it into tooth, we'd have a far more effective Pentagon than we have today. This Tail to Tooth Commission just started up, and I plan to spend a very active role as chairman of that thing, or co-chair, in order to try to come up with suggestions that are useful to Congress and the Pentagon. We have guys like Sam Nunn on the Tail to Tooth Commission, Warren Rudman, several former four-star generals and admirals, as well as private sector guys like myself. We think there is so much waste by habit and process in the Pentagon that we could easily switch plenty of tail into tooth. That's what it's all about.
Okay, let's go back. Sam Nunn is the former chairman of the
Senate Armed Forces Committee.
Armed Forces Committee, and Rudman was a member.
And a very senior member of Congress, and Rudman's a Republican, Nunn's a Democrat, so you got bipartisan support there. And
how many members on the committee?
On the commission? Before we're done, we'll have about 15, of which we probably have 11 or 12 in place now.
Okay. Now, is this a government appointed, or is this self?
Benz has created it. Bill Perry endorsed it, and once he exited as Secretary of Defense, he agreed to be an advisor to our commission.
All right.
Bill Cohen, the current Secretary of Defense, has endorsed it and looks forward to our recommendations. That's no guarantee they'll take them all, but there's so many good things we can recommend through just common sense.
You know, this is worth spending a little more time on. Explain the tail again.
The tail is everything that doesn't fight. The tooth fights and the tail is
all the
overhead.
Administrative things.
Administrative depots, excessive bases that the military doesn't want, but Congress won't let them close it.
Because of jobs or in a specific area or something like that.
Or excessive layers of overhead and supervision and all kinds of things that produce no cutting edge. And it's clearly crazy to have 70% of the whole defense budget going for fat and only 30% going for muscle. And I think we can make a big difference. And there are lots of things we're going to propose.
How is that going to relate to the budget?
Well, what we propose is that once we have our recommendations, that as Congress reduces the tail, assuming they buy our proposals, that the saved money be put in a figurative lockbox. Don't go using it up on some other government pork barrel program. Put it in a lockbox, and then when you need tooth, you take the money out of the lockbox to sharpen the teeth of the military, and then lo and behold, you got a stronger military without spending an extra buck.
Let's get back on that in a moment.
Okay.
Who are you? Seymour Smoke, smoke detector. And I see more smoke coming from that toaster.
Thanks for warning us, Seymour.
I hate smoke. So whenever I see it, I make this noise to warn you. Because where there's smoke, there may be fire.
Be cool about fire safety. Be cool.
We're back with the subject of transitions with Josh Weston. Josh, now that we've taken apart the Pentagon and hopefully we'll rebuild it in the near future, let's get local now. What are some of the local interests you have right now?
Well, I'll pick just a few. One of them that I'm very active on is on the board of Liberty Science Center. That's our new center down in Liberty State Park.
Yes, I've been there. Right.
And one of the things that happened, which I'm glad I could help come along, is we recently installed, compliments of the Air Force, an Air Force simulator in the Science Center.
Flight simulator?
Yeah, so you can go
great.
in there and you can pretend you're a pilot in training, And this is particularly for kids, to get them interested in broader things than just becoming couch potatoes.
Okay.
And we can relate that to science and technology. There's another one that's going to be coming in October. There's a very unusual hobbyist in New Jersey who's built a 15-foot model of the USS Constitution. But it's not just a static model. He has built-in electronics that would boggle your mind. And we're going to make that almost a touchy-feely type of exhibit at Liberty Science Center, where you can relate things like, how can a boat go sailing into the wind? It's aerodynamics.
Right.
So you'll bridge from the model to a lesson on aerodynamics. How can you lift a heavy weight by pulling a rope through a pulley? And we can bridge from the Constitution, lifting a heavy weight, to physics subjects.
Right.
So that one's a hot button. Another one of mine is New Jersey Symphony Orchestra. This state ought to have an orchestra in a nice place. It has a damn good orchestra, and maybe on October 17th, it'll be in a nice place, Performing Arts Center.
The Performing Arts Center, right. Well, are you going to be involved in, this is something that wasn't on your resume, are you going to be involved in perhaps some of the rebirth of our urban areas here in New Jersey? Or are you already? I'll maybe approach that.
Well, I have been in the Committee for Economic Development. That's a group of a couple of hundred CEOs. Where we put out position papers on what might be practical ways, not pie in the sky, to help decayed urban centers come back. And say urban centers partially are what they are because the education system there isn't any good.
What I thought in this transition that we've been talking about, that, and you can address it perhaps better than anyone that I know, is that we have an untapped resource out there of executives like yourself and perhaps middle managers. It's not only top executives, but number 2 and 3 and 4 people who are still ready, willing, and able to make a contribution, and we're not tapping that resource. And is anything being done to address that?
I'm going to use a cliche. It takes 2 to tango. Somebody's got to want their service. For example, I got involved in quite a squabble with the Secretary of Treasury saying we can get guys like me, even if it ain't me, to help you manage and get guidance on an operating environment like IRS with 100,000 employees. In the case of the Treasury Department, they don't want the help.
That's kind of interesting.
Now let's go to the other end. There are a lot of people, particularly if they haven't crossed age 50, that haven't yet reached the stage where they realize they ought to give back. And they're sufficiently career motivated and me oriented that I find it's a devil of a time to get senior managers who are 50, 55, 45 to give time to the public sector. And if none of us do, the public sector will not be what it should be.
Let me say this. I'm going to invite you back and come back in our next program, if you will. We got a lot more to cover, which we haven't tonight. Nice seeing you.
It's been fun to be here.
That's it for this evening, and we'll see Josh in a future episode. Thank you.